Welcome to episode 3 of the Weekly Juice Podcast. My name is Ryan Bevilacqua. I'm joined alongside here my co-host, Cory Jacobson. In today's episodes, we're going to discuss preparing your first deal and buying your first property. So before we dive in, just want to check in. Cory, what's new, man?
Not much. Still stuck inside, but it's funny. I was thinking of a story. I was talking to my mom the other day. We had to move some personal events that we had going on. We had to move some stuff around because of the quarantine. And I started off the conversation with my mom, and she was saying something like, I can't, where's the time gone? I can't believe, I woke up and I'm in my 60s. And I just, thought that was interesting because everyone does that where they wake up and they're 35, or they wake up and they're 50. And there's never been a time in the history, at least that I've been alive in, I think in my parents' life, where this unprecedented time where this quarantine allows for you to slow down and actually live in the moment and take a deep breath, and time's not going by super fast because we're stuck inside. And right. I have no intention to be a motivational speaker here by any means, but the good times can't be considered the good times if there aren't any bad times. So if you consider this a bad time, I just think that people should be taking a lot of deep breaths and realizing that everything's going to be okay. Take a moment to reset, just to kind of go off of our previous episode with where we talked about the quarantine. Everything's going to be all right. Time is slowing down right now, so you have that chance to reset and to enjoy the slowdown, I guess. But
find joy in the pause. I read an article about that called "Finding Joy in the Pause."
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Super important, right? Just like we said in the last episode, take a step back, reset, figure out your goals for next X amount of years of your life, and in a bunch of different buckets, right? Not just one. And
exactly.
There's no better time than the present. We may never get a break like this again. So.
Yep. Exactly. So in this episode, we're going to talk about. Ryan mentioned it briefly, but Ryan's going to go through. I guess when you purchase a home or you purchase your first property, there's a lot of different ways to do it. And Rye's scenario was definitely different than mine because he purchased his first property with a significant other, and I purchased my first property as a house hack, really as an investment, but with the intention for me to live in it and own or occupy as well. But there is differences in how you go about it, and we want our audience members to be prepared. Hopefully when you come out of this quarantine, maybe the next 6 to 12 months or 3 to 6 months, you're ready to take the plunge, buy your first property, which will snowball you to the next one, if that's the route that you'd like to go. So I'll let Rye take it away with how he purchased his home with a significant other, and he can go ahead from there.
Sure. So as Cory mentioned, I purchased my first property with a significant other, and today, according to a study done by Coldwell Banker Real Estate, 1 in 4 couples between ages 18 and 34 will buy a house before they're married together. So I think there's a bunch of different factors that go into it: low mortgage rates, rising rental costs, the ability to deduct mortgage interest from income taxes, just so many reasons not to rent, that people are like, hey, listen, we're not married, we haven't tied the knot and are together forever, but this could be a smart decision for us financially at the moment if we see ourselves going down that path. So they make that decision to do so. So that's personally what I did. And there's a bunch of factors you should take into consideration when you are, going to buy with someone else rather than by yourself. So first thing I would say is compare your credit scores. So you're essentially entering a business partnership with this person. You can't hide anything anymore.
I've never thought of it that way, to be honest. I mean, that's funny because I'm not purchasing a property with a significant other, but it's a good point. I've never even thought about it that way.
Emotion, put it this way, you have to try to take emotions out of it on the business side, right? And the number side, take emotions out of it because this is a business deal. I'll go into the personal side of it too. But so aside from sharing income and personal savings, you have to do this 100% share the credit scores, credit reports, just to make sure, everything's in line, and you're going to need to use those numbers when you go to apply for your loan. So that person's credit score. So say, mine was higher than my significant other's or vice versa. That will impact the ability to get a mortgage. So you could do a couple different things. If you wanted, you could both go in and use both your scores together if you're going to go on the property together. Some people check each other's scores and they realize, wow, like yours is extremely low. We're not going to get a great mortgage from that or a great interest rate. So I'll buy the property and you just pay me the rent. So essentially they're foregoing the partnership and one person will be the sole owner. But married couples are you generally viewed as a single unit, and unmarried couples, by themselves, they have to each apply for their own loan. Second thing I would suggest is open a joint account. So you don't want to be wondering what, each other has in each account, like who's going to be paying what. Have one joint account that you both have access to that you can.
For the property specifically is what you're saying, right?
Specifically for the property, yes. So this is, say you make a conscious decision, you're going to go in together, right?
Yeah.
You want something that you can funnel everything into, from paying the mortgage, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and then set everything up automatically. We've talked about this numerous times, but essentially like automatic monthly deposits from your separate bank accounts into the joint. So that way neither party can forget, oh, hey, I didn't transfer this month, I forgot. Like have it set up automatic so you both know and are confident that it's going to get done. And then once again, have a budget and track everything from home expenses to bills. And you have to map out a plan of who's going to be responsible for what. That makes it the most seamless. So that way, your role, he or she knows her role. And then, the partnership got.
But would you say it'd be pretty important to come to this agreement beforehand, so you're not like starting those fights or problems later? Like this is all something you should probably discuss while you're in the mortgage process, right? I would assume.
100%. I'm going to dive into the personal side of it. Maybe I should have done it vice versa, but we'll dive into the personal side of the whole relationship and why it's important to get everybody on the same page. After I go through these. Cool. Number 3 would be talk money. Like everyone, it seems to be these days, is afraid to talk about money. And it's this big shadow or cloud over it that it gets uncomfortable. Like, oh, I don't care how much you make, or I do, but I'm too afraid to ask. So talk about debt. Like a lot of people have student loans and things. Like you want to talk about your income, what you make, but also debt that you have. So you don't want to jump into this business venture with someone that has a huge amount of debt and they're never going to be able to pay the mortgage back or their student loans. And you're just getting into a snowball down the years of your life. So it's vital to discuss how much debt each person has and is comfortable taking on jumping in. So like that goes into the price of the house, right? You don't want to, in your head, you're getting a $400,000 property, and his or her head, 250 is their limit and that's their max. And then you can't try to meet in the middle because your goals will be set up different and it'll lead to stress down the line. So a smart tactic would be to pick a home with a mortgage that you can both handle, even if the other person is out of the deal. So say something happens.
Yeah.
You want to be able to take on that whole mortgage by yourself.
That's an interesting way to look at it. I've never thought about it like that. I think that's the whole thing with like talking to your significant other, like getting each other on board with the whole financial independence thing. So that allows you to say, hey, significant other, if, I know we might be able to afford this $400,000 home, but maybe it's smarter for us to buy a $250,000 home and save that extra income to put it into assets that grow for us. Would you say that kind of ties in here? Just getting on the same page with not only the home, but your finances, and talking about it a lot. So you're both comfortable with, where do you want to go together? If you're going to get married, you're going to hopefully go down this road together. You don't want it to split at one point because you never talked about money, right?
100%. And then it's going to jump into my next point down the line here, but when you talk about the title and like what type of split partnership you want to kind of do. But a couple more things here is like, just know when you co-sign a mortgage with someone else, you are 100% responsible for the debt. So either you or that person is going to have to be able to fork up the dough at some point for it. So that's why you want to meet in the middle, like you said, and find something that if they can't afford it, you can, and you can take care of it and you feel comfortable. Unexpected expenses pop up all the time. We'll probably dive into this later down the end of the episode.
Yeah.
Mistakes we kind of ran into, but don't overstretch your budget. Don't go for a $400,000 house when you really can only afford a $350 or $300. So it's a numbers game we mentioned a bunch of times, but going into titling. So essentially you have to have the decision, who's going to own the home and who's going to take the title. Typically both parties, if you're going into like with a significant other, both parties would hold the title, and it would just forego, like if something happened to someone else, it would fall into someone else's name. There's three major categories. So there's sole ownership, and this is what Cory did. So Cory owns 100% of the property.
Mhm.
He owns the title. That's his lane. He didn't have anyone else jump in. Second option is joint tenants. So essentially joint tenants with a right to survivorship. Basically, you're considered equal owners, 50-50. Ryan owns 50% of the house, significant other owns 50% of the house. And if something happened to one person, they were to die or some crazy thing happened, the other person would automatically inherit the other's estate and the entire property. So there's a third option that not many people, I guess it's the less common, but if you're tenants in common, right? So essentially it's not a 50-50 split. Each person owns a specific percentage of the property. So one person may own 70% interest while the other owns 30%, just as an example. Then it's split based on basically you have to put this on a deed. So if the partner dies, ownership would not automatically transfer to the other owner. Essentially what would happen, say it's a 70% ownership and I passed away. That 70% ownership would be named to a person in my will. So the deceased owner's heirs essentially would be responsible for that 70%.
Is there one of these routes that you recommend, like personally, not necessarily telling exactly what you did, but is there a route that you would say that you feel like people should be comfortable going down depending upon their scenario?
Absolutely. So I would say if you're getting married, you say you're married, you are already married and this is your first property, go joint tenants, go 50-50. Unless you're confident that everything in your marriage is going to go perfectly smooth, then you can just have one person be the sole ownership and you don't split. But I would say 50-50 is my recommendation.
Seems to make the most sense.
Then tenants in common, that's what, if you are just in a relationship and it's rather new, but you guys decide you don't want to rent anymore, I'd go tenants in common. It might be a little dicey if the relationship breaks up and you own 70%, he or she owns 30%, and then you want to have the conversation up front, basically, right? Because you have to plan for the end of the relationship regardless.
Maybe you don't buy a place if you're not sure you guys are going to be together. That's kind of maybe.
I'd say my number one recommendation would be joint tenants, 50-50. That if something happens, you get the other percent of the property. It doesn't go to some random heir that you may or may not know.
Cool.
So bottom line, it's important that you and your partner enter the agreement with a complete picture of each other's finances. You have to what I would recommend is hire a real estate attorney and have a written contract created that outlines everything, all the desires of the property's division should something happen to someone else. So that way it's in writing, it's legally bound. You guys, there's no bickering even if the relationship goes sour. It's on paper, black and white. Here's what we're going to do. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we discussed steps to prepare, joining and going on a partnership with someone else on the business side of things. Now I want to talk personal, and I could have done this vice versa, which is probably more important to start with this. But you want to get your significant other on the same page. You got to discuss long-term goals and have patience with one another. There's no way it's going to work if you have two different desires in the end, two different outcomes, or two different goals with this property. One person wants it as an investment property for 5 years, then wants to sell their portion of it to make, when it appraises or goes up in value, appreciates, as you say, it goes up in value, and wants to make a quick flip for profit, while the other person wants to hold their whole life and take it for cash flow. And there's a bunch of different things that we can discuss there, but basically you want to get on the same page. It's a huge deal for both of you, especially your first deal. Like, this is groundbreaking. Whether maybe the first thing you ever purchased was a car before here, and that was 15, 20K. Now you're jumping up to the hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's a big, big deal. So you want to have long conversations about this before you just decide to do it one day and jump all in. And make sure to discuss your wants and your needs in a property. Like, hey, I have to have this. I'm not something you're not willing to give up, and he or she should do the same. Then you could talk about your criteria, right? Like you go through all different categories. Talk about the town, the neighborhood, property size, lot size, property condition, number of units, cash flow, appreciation potential when you're talking about what type of property you want to look at and what area.
I think a good thing to look at in that what you're talking about is like buy for your scenario and anyone's scenario, buy around schools, buy around good education systems, buy around hospitals. Those things are going to be around for a long time. Buy close enough to mass transit, close enough to that you can be within driving distance to like a town or something like that. Those places, they're not going to go under. So that kind of ties into where you should be looking.
Right. You want to discuss value with your partner in those aspects, like what are we going to see the most value in these areas? But then also you have to go to, that's in the needs, right? The wants is essentially what type of neighborhood would you want to live in? Do you want to live in a neighborhood filled with single family homes, or do you want to live in a townhouse community? Do you want to live in a condo? Do you want to have a university nearby to rent, or do you want to have nice schools for your kids to grow up and go to school there? So there's a lot of different factors you have to play with, and you have to have the conversation up front. So that way you can get the gears turning and
Totally
make decisions moving forward. So just a few tips here when you're looking to buy. You're going to get the best deal when you buy a property versus when you sell a property. Mm-hmm. So you hear that a bunch of times reading books and through people that have purchased properties. It's always upfront when you buy versus when you sell.
Yep.
Appreciation should be viewed as, this is the advice I was given, is appreciation should be viewed as icing on the cake. You make a profit when you purchase the property based on what it's currently worth, rather than what you think it might be worth someday.
Yep.
Just
especially if you're talking about like from the cash flow perspective, if you intend to rent it out one day, right?
Right. Yeah. Sorry, this is geared more for investment properties. We could talk about buying your first home and you want to live in it for years. Cory and I specifically purchased ours for long-term investments in different strategies, but good to set that up front.
Well, you can buy it with a significant other with the intention to do that. That's the scenario you're talking
100%.
about.
And maybe to provide a little more clarity. So this is my first home. I didn't view it as a starter home. I viewed it as an investment property. So you could call it a starter home, whatever. And we decided to go the townhouse route just because, and I specifically purchased in a nice area by a university because I know at some point someone will be willing to rent this property.
Yep.
You crunch the numbers and do everything, and when it feels like a good fit, you take the plunge. But for me, that was important. I don't want to I wanted to start my portfolio, and I didn't want to just buy a property, sell it, and then be done with it. I view it as a long-term hold. Yep. So that's kind of where I'm at here. There's 10 overarching tips I could give you in kind of the roadmap when you're buying your first property. And Cory and I will dive into a bunch of these, but they tie into some of our previous episodes. The first tip is pay off all your debt and build an emergency fund, right? We talked about that in savings. You can't buy a property or even think about investing in a property if you don't have some sort of nest egg. So that'd be number one. Two, you want to determine how much house you can afford. So you talk to your significant other. Here's how much we have in savings. Here's how much debt we have. How much can we forego? What's our risk tolerance at this current moment? And then you crunch the numbers. And there's a bunch of different calculators out there where you can figure out, okay, this is XYZ, what I can afford. But have that open conversation and don't be afraid if you can't afford something, and you don't be embarrassed. Like, hey, it's your first property. You're thinking long term. You're not thinking short term, right? Mm-hmm. So, and number 3 pops right into it: saving a down payment. So traditionally, people, and it goes a bunch of different ways, but traditionally people think, oh, I have to put 20% down on a home or my first property. That's not true. Yep. You can, and it'll forego PMI, which is
private mortgage insurance. Yeah.
Yep. But it only requires 3.5% down for an FHA loan when you're buying your first property. So don't think you have to go all at 20%. I believe we've crunched the numbers here on that before, but we can also go into that again. Number 4 would be save for closing costs. So this for me was insane to realize how much closing costs were when I got to the end. So we were crunching numbers and like, okay, we can afford X, Y, and Z. And then you get to closing, or they send you the final, I guess like a guesstimate. I forget the exact name of the form, but here's like a summary of what you can expect to owe. And you see closing costs, and some of them can go between $7,000 and $15,000. Yep. You'll see a crazy number. And I was like, holy crap, I was not expecting that.
Yep. Especially in the Philadelphia area where you pay a transfer tax, which is 2% on your home. That's part of your closing costs, which is insane. But I'm going to talk about that in the next episode, where we dive into specific numbers to elaborate on what you're talking about right now.
Yeah. So perfect point there, though. Every market's different. So I have friends in Massachusetts and Georgia and LA, and like everything is so different. Where closing costs in Massachusetts could be $3,000 as opposed to 15 or 10 or something like that. So
Mhm.
just it's in your market. Corey will dive into it, but good point there. You're moving down the list. You're going to want to get pre-approved for a loan. So you can shop around for these. They'll be pretty competitive. Other companies will want to get your business, but
Yeah,
right now,
with a mortgage lender, right? That's who you're going to for these.
yep, you're going to a mortgage lender here, and at 2020, we've seen really low mortgage or interest rates here. So if you have the dough now, I think there's a little uncertainty out there, but you might be able to get a really low interest
At the
rate.
current state, it's like 3.2,
Mhm.
3.3 at the time we're recording this, which is, in my opinion, a really good mortgage rate. So it's definitely a good time to buy for
And then
sure.
people that have properties, it's also a great time to refinance. So
Yep.
say you have a 5% interest rate now, and you can jump down to 3, and then you continue to just say you continue to pay the same amount for your mortgage, that same sum each month. You're going to pay off your loan faster, but also by trimming down your interest rate, you're going to save so much money over time.
Yep.
So pre-approve for a loan. Then we talked about this already, but find properties for sale in your price range. You don't want to shop high and out of your range, because you're going to see something shiny, fancy that you will fixate your mind on it and be like, hey, I need to have something like this, or I don't want to buy. So what I would suggest is don't tease yourself if you can, and go based off your numbers. We talked about this. Take the emotions out of this. This is a numbers game. If the numbers are not right, move on. So we talked about different neighborhoods and finding the best fit. I would also talk about and suggest that you go to open houses and get a feel for what each property looks like inside. Well, there's going to be a bunch of different styles, types of properties, but then also you get to meet realtors and agents inside the houses, other people that are your competition, right? The people that are going to make an offer on one of the properties. So you just get a real feel for the whole experience if you attend an open house and go through the experience of being there. I
Yep.
would say. Then we talked about thinking long term as opposed to short term. I would also say we talked about competition, right? And people in there. When you go, you're gonna at some point. I would recommend for your first property is to hire a real estate agent, and there's a bunch. Essentially, should interview this person and ask a bunch of different questions to make sure they are aligned with your goals and they're looking out for you.
Yep.
And then this is going to help in the process when you go to make an offer and negotiations.
I'll give you an example with that real quick, Rye. Like I've bought two properties, and one I had an agent who was a wonderful young lady. She was awesome, but she didn't know the investment side as much as my second agent, where I found a guy who really understood, had investment properties himself. So once you start networking and finding out who really understands it, who's done it before, you'll be able to navigate through what realtor works for you. There are realtors that have owned investment properties themselves. And if that's the route you want to go, I would definitely do the research, talk to the right people, and find the person who's done it before.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads me into another episode. We're going to probably discuss building your team. So you
Yep.
know exactly who to get in your circle, who you're going to need to prepare for closing, and the offer, the whole process, essentially, who
Yeah.
you're going to want, and who you're going to need. So that way you'll feel even more confident. I would say this seems daunting up front, and you don't realize it really till you go through it, that you're not on your own. There's people that do this for a living, and they help guide you through it. So there's a lot of questions that we have answers to, but that we still need answers to, having gone through it. So I would say there's professionals that are going to take care of you. Don't be too scared. So the last kind of tip is just prepping for closing, right? So you get all your team together and prepare for the day that you're going to close on your deal and wrap this thing up. It takes a little bit longer than you'd think during the day when you're there signing a bunch of paperwork, but no better feeling than getting the keys and walking out. So
Absolutely. Yeah. And you talked about getting to closing, and you talked a little bit about the closing costs and down payment and stuff like that. I'm going to give you now, I think, my experience with it. I'm going to dive into a little bit of the numbers of, how much money do you really need to make this happen? It's how much do you need in reserves? How much what do these closing costs actually, what do they cost? So I'll give you an example of, let's just use in the Philadelphia area, a $250,000 home for an example. I didn't know how much the down payment was, how much I needed for reserves or anything like that before I got into it. So these are some of the mistakes that I made that I ended up learning along the way. So we're talking about the real cost of buying a $250,000 home. Ride said that the number, if you're intending to live in the property, if you're intending to own or occupy, you can put as little as 3.5% down. I used a buffer, so I said, let's just talk about putting 5% down. So 5% of $250,000 is $12,500. So that is specifically allotted for your down payment. Where I said the number of closing costs can vary in this area between like 7,500 and 15,000. Let's just kind of meet somewhere in the middle-ish. We'll use $10,000 number for your closing costs. So that's 12,500 for the down payment, $10,000 for closing costs. So you have, what is that? $22,500 right there. And then on top of that, if that drives you completely broke, I would say you're not ready to buy a property. What do you need in reserves? Of a $250,000 home, I like to use a number of 3% to 5% in reserves. So 3% to 5% is $7,500 to $12,500 in reserves. Let's just use a number of 8,000. You can use 10,000. Let's just say those reserves are for if you get in the property and maybe you didn't check everything with the inspection and something major breaks. You just want to have some money in reserves there. So that 12,500 plus 10,000 for 12,500 for down payment plus 10,000 for closing costs plus around 8 to 10,000, let's call it, for reserves. That's around $30,000. If you have that $30,000 number, you're good to go. You can make this move on a $250,000 home. So, and the reason I say the reserves and having those is because when you get in the home and you get it inspected, there are some things that you can look for, like how new is the roof? A roof on an average size home could cost anywhere between, $4,000 and $10,000 to fix. So, how new are these major mechanical systems? The AC unit, the heating system, the boiler, the hot water heater. How new are the windows? Some of these things can range from $1,000 fix to a $10,000 to $15,000 fix. So look, they're not all going to break at once. And believe me, there's an inverse relationship between how much you have saved and then the shit that's going to break. Like if you have $1,000 saved, you better believe that you're going to need a new roof in a year or two. If you have $15,000 in reserves, you probably won't even use it. But like it just ends up working out like that. So it's like, it's just how it works. But if you buy a home that has a 25-year-old roof, you got to understand the life of some of these capital expenditures. Like that's about when you're going to need a new one, every 25 or 30 years. So just do some research on those types of things and the major mechanical systems when you purchase a home. I like to use 3 to 5% of the property value to have in reserve. So we talked about that $30,000 number. For me, I bought my property as a house hack. So, but some of those same things tie in, as Rye was talking about, like these markets of where your home is located. I like to break it up into an A market, a B market, a C market, and a D market. So those are like the segments of where I talk about purchasing homes. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about each market and why I like the B market the best to buy a home. Your A market is typically, your $500,000 and above, your luxury housing, your apartments in a center city district. Your B market is potentially around schools and hospitals, but maybe not in the suburbs necessarily, but a little bit out of where the main hub is. They're a little bit lower priced than I'm talking about Philadelphia at least. They're a little bit lower priced than your $500,000. Your C market is a little bit more working class, a little bit more blue collar. It's still a great place to live, but your home values might be under that $250,000 range. And then your D market is more of, I don't like to use the word ghetto, but it's more of an area that's less desirable to live. And I would, appreciation might not be as great. So it's just, I wouldn't cash flow might be better. But for me personally, I don't like looking in those markets to purchase property just because it's hard to manage. So I like the B, and the biggest reason why I like the B market is because when there's a market correction in terms of the stock market or the economy goes down, those A market people say, okay, maybe we have a little bit less money. We're going to move down to the B. But the A market, nobody's coming down from the A. There's nothing above the A. So I feel like the B market is a safe type of range there. Also, because I purchased my property as a house hack, I purchased a 3-bed, 2-bath property. And I made sure that I looked at the rental comps in the area for what a bedroom would rent out for if I was renting it to tenants. Let's just call it, each room rented out for $700 in the house. So 700 plus 700 plus 700 is $2,100. I'm living in one of those, so you only have $1,400 accounted for. But if your mortgage is anywhere between $1,200 and $1,500, you're paying for a lot of that by having your tenants live there. So that is kind of breaking down the numbers of purchasing the property with a significant other, and then the numbers of it when you are purchasing the property kind of on your own, specifically in my scenario for a house hack. I don't know. I think we covered kind of the basics there. Rye, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you covered it. I would say too, like jumping into buying your first property, right? We talked about how we both just did it at one point, right? Like it
You
just
got to
happened.
get over the fear, right? You got to get over the fear. Like we talked about analysis paralysis, and I was prepared. I didn't know I was prepared, but I was really prepared because I was doing the research. I was we talked about Zillow and Trulia, and I was looking at the properties and what they would rent for in the future and making sure that I had that rent gap and of what a property would rent for versus what my mortgage would be on it. And you just have to eventually dive in. And look, for me, the worst case scenario when you purchase a property is that you're going to hopefully sell it for around what you paid for it. And the down payment of the property is not lost money. It's going into the equity of the home. So you're putting, if you buy a $250,000 home and you put $15,000 into it, you didn't lose that $15,000. You now have a $235,000 mortgage, and you can sell it for $250,000. So you still have that. So you still have that $15,000 just within your net worth in the equity of the home, if that makes sense.
I think that's important to share.
Yeah.
I think they're paying. It's almost paying. It's like paying food, right? You pay for it and just it goes away. It's
Yeah.
not the case. Even when you pay for your mortgage every month, you're paying a proportion of your equity, like a lot of it's interest in the early stages, but you can write off that interest in your taxes. We talked about the benefits as well. Not to jump down a rabbit hole, but I think it's very important to talk about
Yeah.
equity and how you can transition that into whether it's another property or another investment down the line. Should you sell? Should you exchange? So super, super important there.
Yeah, and it all ties into what we talked about in the starting of this podcast is like freeing up your time, making sure you're happy. It's because you're putting in your money into an asset that is yours that will grow and allow you to have future money down the line that you can spend on things that you want that make you happy. So that's why we talked about getting in your first deal, just doing it. You have to dive in. And Ryan actually have some funny stories about pushing through the fear and like what happened specifically. I can talk about what happened to me when I first purchased the property. I bought a home in, like we said, in the Philadelphia area. And like I said, I was prepared. I did all my numbers. I hired what I thought was a very good inspector. And maybe that's one of the mistakes I got. I got to do some more homework on that. And you're not going to always come out of this without mistakes. Like they're going to happen. And they shape you to become better. But one of the things that I went through is that literally right after I purchased the home, I was in the process of moving. So a couple of days have went by since I was in the home, and I walked in the front door, opened the house was empty. It was beautiful. I walked into the basement, and there was, I kid you not, 2 inches of water throughout the entire basement. And I like literally had this moment where I was like, holy shit, like what did I just do? Like I didn't think of
that moment with me.
Exactly. So
I called right away.
Wait, were you with me or did I call you? I forget.
Called me. You
Yeah,
go.
so exactly. So I was like, oh my God, who do I
I don't
call?
think I should have done this. I blew it. What did I do?
Yeah. And I had this moment where, you kind of instantly go to the negative and you think, oh my God, this is a $15,000 expense. Like, am I prepared to pay for this? Like, I have to get a new basement. I have to dig a new hole. Like, I just didn't know. So I called you and we called your dad, who happens to be a contractor. And he kind of calmed us down and he said, like, here's some key things that you should check out. And so I just kind of dove in and did some research. And the long story short is that I broke through the fear, and it ended up not being a $15,000 fix. It turns out that the downspouts in the house ran the stormwater through the property. So when it rained a lot, it overflowed in a specific area. So literally that $15,000 fix that I thought, it was $25. I went to Lowe's. I purchased these downspout extenders. I cut them and I put them out into my backyard and my front yard. And I have had essentially zero water since that day. So it's all about pushing through the fear, but I was prepared. I had reserves. Like, I was ready to, like, okay, if I need to spend this money, I can. And I guess that ties in a little bit into your story about, sometimes maybe you didn't check the AC system when you first purchased the home. Like, I don't know,
Well, ours kind of went to, you can jump back. My story kind of jumps back to the negotiation phase. Like, we settled on a price and it was at as is, right? Like, he's not fixing anything that has to be fixed in the house. And we had the inspection come through, right? The inspector come through, everything looked good. There were minor fixes and he totaled them up, and this is doable. It was not expensive at all, really. And being that it was my first time doing this, and I tried to do as much research as I could, but I didn't realize that I knew roofs had a 25-year lifespan, but and then AC units, like 10 to 15, I didn't know that. And I didn't know,
and you're not going to know everything, man, right?
How long's the fridge last? I don't know, just little things. You're like, some things you never think of.
Yep.
So we get about a year into owning the property, and had a great first year, and then the summer hits the following, and starts getting really hot in the house. I'm like, this is kind of weird. I don't know what's going on. And go try to turn the AC on, turn the fan on, keep playing with the numbers. Everything's moving, but your boy's still hot, and it wasn't working. So I go outside, the fan. I looked at the thing. I'm like, damn, I should have looked at this closer. This thing's a piece of shit. It was horrible.
Yeah.
So it was literally lopsided. You could tell it was super old. I'm like, wow. So we had one guy come out and inspect. He's like, yeah, this is super. Like, this thing's shot. I can repair it for X amount, but you need to get this. You need to get a new one. And I'm like, okay, a new one. What are we talking? He's like, they range anywhere between about 7,500 and 12 grand. I go, closing costs again?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
We just did this a year ago. So I got another company to come in to get another opinion, right? Like, supposed to do that pretty much everything. So had another guy come in and he looked at it and he's just like, yeah, I'm not touching this thing. Literally wouldn't even go for it because it was such a piece.
Really?
The AC unit, and then the furnace I had to check out the furnace because I was just scared about everything at this point.
Yeah.
Being that it was a townhouse, the furnace, basically the piping was a little bit strange. There wasn't an outspout in that. And he's like, you could use both a new AC unit and a furnace.
Yep.
Like, oh my God. Like, how much is this? He goes, honestly, I'm not touching this, man. I don't know this specific design of who built the townhouse.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it. So then I called the first guys back. I'm like, all right, what's the deal? We went through everything and we ended up, I had to go through negotiating with them. Luckily, it wasn't like a fixed price. I could negotiate the specific unit, tie it in with the furnace, and package the deal up. Luckily, working in sales has helped me out. That was the first time in real life. It genuinely, I was like, wow, this helped me out. Yeah. So I ended up getting a decent deal of what I thought, but it was still a huge capital expense that if I didn't have a emergency fund for these things, I would have been screwed 100%. But
so I guess the whole point, like the question that I'm going to ask you is like, even though it was scary and even though you literally had a worst case scenario, how glad are you that you just pushed through the fear and did it? Like
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, it's whatever. Cool. You go on with clothing. There's things that happen all the time. There's things that are going to happen to your car, that happen to your family. Like, you just have to move on and get through the fear. of trying things, right?
And I think I realized that too when I purchased. Like, I know now, I expect it. I'm like, something's gonna go wrong. Like, it's okay though, because like that is part of the learning. And then the next time you don't make the same mistake. And again, we're not preaching to people. I'm just trying to tell you literally exactly what happened to me. And it's like, it's kind of funny now that I look back on it, but I'm so glad I did it. It started the snowball going down the hill. I was able to get my next property, and guess what? In the next 12 to 18 months, I'm getting another one. So because I'm starting that snowball. So
I
yeah,
have
I
a
think that. Go ahead.
so one of my mentors didn't go to college, very successful, owns his own company. And basically every time something goes wrong or he has a learning experience, he goes through something, he goes, just went to college today. And
Yeah, dude. How much more have you learned in the last 5 years than you did actually in college? And like, that's all.
crazy. You learn through teaching yourself and self-educate, what's called self-education, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you go through the experiences in college, and I truly believe that it is a benefit for most people. But I truly also believe that you don't need to go to be successful. You have a bunch of different experiences. You broaden your network. This kind of thing. Like, hey, we wouldn't have met. So
Yeah.
just
No, I loved college. Don't get me wrong. But yeah, I totally agree. You don't have to do it these
it's a
days.
little anecdote that I always remember. Like any shitty things happen, something bad, I'm like, went to college today,
Yeah,
and it's
it's
like
so
whatever.
true. You learn. It's wins and not losses. It's wins and lessons. At least that's how I look at it. So, like, I think we're going to continue to give you guys the shit that we went through, the mistakes we made, because it only helps people prepare for that. I bet someone's going to look at this and say, you know what, I'm going to get a better inspector, Cory, or I'm going to look at the AC system, or I'm going to look at the roof, or I'm going to look at these, the oven and the fridge, and how new are these things? And so
You
we
need
want
to
to help
look at
you.
the lifespan of appliances. Like, do your homework on every aspect, and just learn from our mistakes. Right? Like
Yep.
we're learning from others. So
We can have a whole episode on mistakes, because I got plenty more for you, but we're still kicking. We're moving along. Rye, I know, is looking to purchase his next. I don't know, in undefined amount of time with the coronavirus, but soon, right? Like, and I think we're gonna keep this thing rolling. Okay, so for this week, something to share. We are going to go into Zillow, Trulia, and Redfin, which are services that list properties, and they give you details on, potentially your next deal. So for example, Zillow is a listing service. It's Zillow.com, Zillow.com. And on the site, you can search by area of where you live or where you want to purchase your property in, and it gives you an estimated range of what the cost of the house is. It talks about how much the taxes are. It gives you an overview of the property. When's the last time it sold? What year was it built? What type of family is it? Does it have parking? Is there a cooling or heating system? How big is the lot? And it goes through the entire researching process of when it was sold and how many times it's been sold maybe in the last 10 years. And they're not always accurate, but it does give you an option to look at the projection of how much it's going to cost in the future. Again, it's not gospel, but this is actually how Rye and I, all of our properties that we found and purchased, we did it through the multiple listing services, what the overall arching umbrella is called, multiple listing service, which is comprised of Zillow, Trulia, Redfin. But they're really great resources for figuring out the numbers. There's also calculators that we can talk about in a later episode to take the numbers from Zillow and Redfin and Trulia and plug them in and find out, is this going to be a good cash flowing asset for me? But Trulia and Redfin and Zillow give you the kind of a overview of each particular property. So it's a really good resource. That's what are something to share for episode 3 of the Weekly Juice podcast. Also, rate, subscribe, review. It would really help us out if you like the show. It would really it kind of pushes us towards the top of the list for when we get searched. And if you like it, do it. Peace.